the question I'm most often asked on comments and people getting in touch is, where do you focus in landscape photography? And it's a really good question because it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I thought what I'd do today is make a film about focusing in landscape photography, and there's a couple of options, a couple of tips. So I've come to Llyn Idwal. Last time I was here, I was wild camping just in that coombe up there. So have a check of that. But I'm making my way around. Got a gate to negotiate. Making my way around to the top end of the lake, and one of the reasons I've come here, well, it's stunningly beautiful, but it's one of those places that give you lots of opportunities for composition and to test focusing. And what I mean by that is there's great opportunities here to have images with lots of foreground interest, but also depending on your composition, there's opportunities to create images that don't really have foreground interest, and that's one of the challenges when focusing in landscape photography. Foreground interest or no foreground interest. Where do I put my focus points and how do I do it? So I'm going to head around the top of the lake and I'll look at where I focus, but I'll also give a couple of different explanations of how to maximize the sharpness in your image. I've made a film about hyperfocal distance in the past, and I'll stick the video in at the end. I'll stick the link in at the end. But there's also a couple of other options which I'll talk about, which sometimes use, sometimes don't. Depends on kind of the location and all sorts of things. But when I get into a nice place, I'll start talking you through the process. And don't be deceived. It's clear blue sky, but it's cold. I think it's probably hovering around 0, and there's a bit of a wind, so a bit of wind chill factor, but stunning place. It's the top end of the lake, and the first focusing technique I'm going to use is hyperfocal distance. So I've actually made a full film about hyperfocal distance, so I'll put the link up, but don't watch it now, come back to it because you'll miss all the good bits. So hyperfocal distance is essentially, it's a calculation of where to place your focus point that gives the maximum depth of field forwards and backwards. And in the old days, people used to carry around kind of hyperfocal tables, which is like a sheet and you do the calculation. But it's essentially, it's a calculation based on the lens, the focal length, the aperture, the sensor size, all those sort of things, whether you've got a beard or not, which way the wind's blowing. So it's quite a complicated calculation, but there's loads of apps. I use an app called Photopills. So there's loads of apps that you can use to calculate the distance. And what you do is you program in your lens, the focal length, all that sort of stuff, and it tells you where to focus. And in this instance, I'm on f11. Now it might be a rescue helicopter going over. It might seem counterintuitive that I'm on f11, because you think, well, f22 gives the biggest depth of field, which is absolutely true. F22 on this lens will give the biggest depth of field. But because of the way the lenses are constructed, when you go to f22, the size of the aperture means you get something called diffraction. So you get a lot of light coming into the lens, and I asked my daughter who's doing GCSE physics, but the light diffracts coming in and hitting the sensor, so it can cause softness. So actually, I wouldn't go to f22 in this circumstance. f22 has its places, but in this circumstances, don't go to f22. I'm on f11. Focal length is about 18 mil, and that gives me a hyperfocal distance of about just over a metre, 1.2 metres. I think in fact it's 1.21, so I'm actually focused. So what I do is I focus, see this rock just here. Photopills also will tell you where 1.21 metres is. This rock here is my focal point. So I focused, what I did is focus on the, lock off my focus, and then set my composition. So once you've focused, lock it off, and then get your composition. And my composition includes these rocks, these two trees, and then a look across Llyn Idwal to Penner Ol Wen. I quite like the composition actually. It's got some foreground interest down in the bottom corner. The shape of Llyn Idwal is nice because it's kind of curvaceous, which helps. And then there's a little bit of sun and a bit of cloud coming and going on Penner Ol Wen. So I'll take that. That's, as I said, F11. I'm taking my reading, my meter reading, off the lake, just near the lake. And hopefully what I get there is a nice image with acceptable sharpness right through the image. I say acceptable because you'll never, so never's a harsh word, very, very difficult to get pin sharp focus right from the very front to the very back of the image. It's possible, but it's very rare, partly because of the nature of cameras, but also partly because of the weather. Just with my naked eye, there's a bit of haze in the valley, so unless it was absolutely clear, perfect conditions, you're always going to get a bit of an issue. But this is how you make sure you're giving yourself the best option. So that's that image taken using hyperfocal distance. I'm going to move onwards, look for other compositions, and try a couple of different techniques. Things I go through for a photograph. So spoke to you before, and I was down there. So there's Llyn Idwal, and I was not much higher than Llyn Idwal, and I've come up to the top of Devil's Kitchen. So this is Devil's Kitchen, and there's a route. If you know the area, if you're down at the end of Llyn Idwal looking this way, it looks like an impenetrable wall, but there's actually a route up. It's fairly steep, so I'll show you. I hope you don't mind heights, but you come up that way, and there's a bit of scrambling. Met a nice chap. Just going to remind myself of his. So he's a musician, so I'm going to look him up. But we had a good chat about photography. But his music is called Time Dog the Horse, so I'm going to check him out when I get back. But anyway, so the second focusing. So remember, you remember, it's like seconds ago for you. It was about 45 minutes, an hour ago for me. I was talking about hyperfocal distance and the desire to get kind of as much sharpness through the frame as possible. Now this is the kind of second kind of category of focus that I'm talking about, and this is where there's no foreground interest. So I'll show you the image I'm working on. So I'm looking across Llyn Idwal to Penner Ol Wen and Trefhan, and this is E Gribben. So I'm looking, I'll probably do a 2-shot panorama, kind of one here and one there. But if you look at the image, there's no foreground interest. I'm not going for foreground interest. I'm going for a kind of proper view of the landscape. So where have I focused? What do I do? Rule of thumb, about a third into the image, about a third of the way into the image. So I reckon, kind of by the rule of eye, about a third of the way into the image is somewhere on the side of a Gribben. So somewhere over there. So I've focused over here, just on the kind of, I haven't picked a particular spot, I've just focused on that side there. I reckon that's about a third of the way. And I've got my ND filter in, and I'm looking to take an image that incorporates Trefhan, which is now nicely in sun, so I'm going to take that image, and Penner Ol Wen. But there's lovely kind of dappled light in the valley at the moment. So that's the second option. When you're not looking, there is some, I could take an image here with this in the foreground. In fact, I might do that as a second option. But when you've got nothing in the kind of near distance, my rule of thumb is look about a third of the way into the image. And I was on F11, sorry, so F11 on the side of a Gribben, and Bob's your uncle. So going to take a couple more of those as the light changes. I might do another one So there's this nice kind of rocky outcrop. If I can get an image with that, I might do that as well. But then I think I'll do the third option. Maybe I'm going to go up a garn and then work my way back around. So might do the third option when I get up there. Well, it's gone cloudy, but actually it's making for quite nice atmospheric images. So looking at my previous time I spoke to you, I don't know if you can see that green lake, but I was just to the left of the green lake down there. So come up, had a chat with a guy and a dog as well. Sorry about the wind. So again, looking down into the Ogwen Valley, there's Llyn Ogwen, and you might be able to see that little. I did a wild camp down there, so check out that film. I remember it being quite wet. So looking down into the Ogwen Valley, there's obviously all this mist swirling around, but gives me a good opportunity to demonstrate kind of the third way of where do I focus, how do I focus, and it's kind of it's a little bit like hyperfocal distance, but doesn't involve any calculations, doesn't involve any tables, doesn't take into consideration kind of your lens, your aperture, all that type of thing. It's a kind of really simple. I use it occasionally. Personally, I think hyperfocal is a bit more precise, but kind of this is a nice rule of thumb, and it's called double distance. And the reason I've stopped here is it gives the perfect example of what double distance is. So I'm using these kind of jagged rocks as the foreground interest, and what you do with double distance focusing is you look at what do you want to be in focus at the start of the image, how far away it is. So I'm looking at this kind of little upright rock here, and I reckon that's about 3 feet away. So double distance, I then focus 6 feet away. So my focus point is just double that point. So that's 3 feet, and I'm actually focused on those other rocks there, which I reckon is about 6 feet. So it's not super precise. But what you do, what's the closest point I want the focus to be? I want the image to be kind of sharp. It's 3 feet away. So I focus 6 feet away, and obviously if it's 5 feet away, focus 10 feet away. If it's 2 feet away, you focus 4 feet away. So my focus point is about 6 feet away. Then what hopefully renders is from that point 6 feet away to the camera, sharpness, and away from the camera into the distance, sharpness. The challenge in this situation is the distance is a long way away. So I'm on f11. The composition is kind of jaggedy rocks, looking into the mountains, but the clouds come in, so not the greatest conditions to be shooting. But I did have a couple a little bit earlier on where there was sun shining just onto the Llyn Ogwen, and the mist was kind of swirling, so it looks like I was looking through a porthole. But kind of that's the third way of focusing, double distance. And the reason kind of lots of people use it, it's really easy to remember. Double distance, what's the closest point? Double it. 3 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever it is. So really easy, and these are the sort of circumstances where it's nice to use, because there's obvious points. You know, there's an obvious, I can see that point there, and there's another point 6 feet away. That's 3 feet, that's 6 feet. So it helps when there's kind of really obvious foreground interest with kind of something you can measure by eye. So hope that explains it. It's a dead simple thing to remember. Personally, as I said, I prefer hyperfocal because it seems a bit more precise. But you know, if you're going for a quick shot, this is a perfect example. If I'd set up and the cloud suddenly cleared and I want to do it quick, I'd do double distance, because by the time I've calculated my hyperfocal, things might have changed. So hopefully quick and easy way to maximise your sharpness through the image. And now I'm going to keep pushing on, Agarn, going for the summit, and then back down to Ogwen. So back to where it all began. Well, not quite. So Llyn Idwal, started my film up at the far end, and then I know from here it looks like that's an impenetrable wall, Devil's Kitchen, but actually so I kind of headed up and then you kind of zigzag up and onto the summit, and then across and onto Agarn, and then back around and down. So quite a nice walk, but I hope the kind of different options of how to focus and where to focus was useful. There is another option which I'll do a separate video around, which is focus stacking, but my experience is focus stacking doesn't really work all that well in the mountains. You need an image with a kind of almost like a sequential composition. So just checking that dog wasn't having a wee on my bag. So it wouldn't work here, for example. It wouldn't work with the lake, because there'd be nothing really to focus on in the mid-ground. You need, you know, if you were looking maybe that way, it would work, but that's that way, sorry, it's not a very good composition. So, but I'll do, if you're interested, I'll do an image on, the film on focus stacking, how to focus stack. So, hope you enjoyed that trip, hope it makes sense, and I'll see you next time around. And don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget, when you subscribe, click the bell, then you get a notification that I've uploaded something new. And see you soon.